Hello, my name is Katie and welcome to my June wrap-up. If you missed it, I will link my mid-month wrap-up that I did earlier this month, and you can go check out the books I talk about there. I will quickly mention them, but I won't really discuss them in any length. I read 31 books in June. I know the title says 30 and 30, but that's just because it worked really well. Technically, it was 31. Yes, I'm exhausted. I don't even know if I like reading anymore. But by the time you get to 25 books in 25 days, you just have to force those other 5. Like, you just have to. So that's what I did. So let's get going and start with some stats, shall we? As stated, in the month of June, I read 31 books for a total of 10,212 pages. I do want to put a little perspective on this, though. So my page per book average this month was 329 pages, and in May it was 362 pages. So I was reading considerably shorter books this month. So that's just something to keep in mind. 31 books doesn't necessarily mean that I read a ton more than some people. You know what I'm saying? As per usual, my moods were dark, reflective, emotional, and challenging, and a whole bunch of other things, but those are the big ones. As far as pacing goes, I had 11 that were slow, which I think is more than normal for me. 13 that were medium, and 7 that were fast-paced. Page numbers, I had 12 that were under 300 pages. 17 that were between 300 and 499 pages, and then 2 that were 500 plus. I read 24 fiction and 7 nonfiction, and then these are the genres I mostly read from. It looks like historical is the most, although I will say that a lot of the books I read had LGBTQIA plus representation, they just weren't tagged that way in Storygraph, so that's why the number looks smaller than what I'm going to be saying in my wrap-up, because I have them split up into LGBT anyway. You'll see in a minute. And then of the 29 books that I actually rated, we had an average rating of 3.8 stars, which is not half bad. So before we get started, something I do want to ask is, do you guys like knowing my star ratings? Because I feel like a lot of times my star ratings are kind of arbitrary, and that they don't always necessarily totally reflect my feelings as accurately as maybe they could. So I don't know. Let me know. We'll do a little poll type of situation. Just let me know in the comments. Do you like hearing what my star rating was for each book, or do you not care? You just want to hear about the book? We'll start with the LGBTQIA plus books. I had a vlog in which I talked about 3 of them, which was What's Your Pronoun? Beyond He and She by Dennis Barron, Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters, and Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I will link that in the description box, and then my mid-month wrap-up will also be linked there because that's where I talk about those books. In the mid-month wrap-up, I also talk about The Black Tides of Heaven by Neon Yang and Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. So the only one I have to add to that for the second half of the month is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. So this is one that I've been thinking about a lot, and because I've been thinking about it so much, I almost want to go bump up my rating to a 5-star. But this is what I'm saying when I mean that I think ratings, especially my ratings, just feel fairly arbitrary, and that my feelings can change even within a matter of days. So I don't even know if knowing my star rating is an accurate representation of how I felt. Anyway, A Memory Called Empire. First off, the names and the words can get a little bit difficult to pronounce. I spent so long in the back of the book in the pronunciation guide trying to wrap my tongue around some of these words. Like, the empire is the Teixcalanli Empire? I think. I don't know. Anyway, we are following an ambassador. She is from this very small, like, station whose name I can't even remember now. Wow. Anyway, she goes to Teixcalan as an ambassador, they requested somebody else come. So she doesn't know what happened to her predecessor. She just suspects he's dead, and when she gets there, she's like, oh yeah, he's definitely dead. But she realizes, like, there are suspicious circumstances here. So the main thing about this book is that the world building is so rich. The culture that Martine developed is exceptional. Unreal. I don't know if I've ever read anything like it. The culture is heavily based in like a poetry tradition. So their histories are told in poems. Where we would play like word games, they play like poetry games. And poetry is not my strong suit. So there were bits of that I found to be confusing. And then the naming system was a little confusing. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder if perhaps it's a good thing that I was confused. Because while I look at it and I'm in awe because of the skill that the author was able to present these things with, I was still confused. But Mahit, the main character, whose name I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, she would have been confused like that too. There would have been serious culture shock, even though she has studied this empire and has admired it from afar for years and years and years. Living in it is a totally different thing. So I actually kind of think it was better in the end that I felt out of place and a little out of touch, because that's how our main character was feeling. Anyway, I hope that made sense. I really liked this. It ended up being much more adventurous than I thought, and yeah, really great read. I really recommend this one. Then I read some books in honor of Juneteenth. I tried to pick a bunch of books by Black authors just because I didn't want the holiday to go unmarked, at least not on my channel. So in the first part of the month, I read The Rosewater Redemption by Tade Thompson and Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. You can see both of those in my mid-month wrap-up. The next book I read, I think the author is a woman of color. I'm not totally certain, but I think she is, particularly because of I'll just tell you, okay, the book was Red Island House by Andrea Lee, and our main character, Shay, she's a Black American, and she marries an Italian man, and he is building this exceptional house, like this mansion, essentially, on the island of Madagascar. So Shay starts living part of her life there, mostly summers, holidays, that kind of thing, as the mistress of this house, and that's kind of an unusual position for a Black woman to be in. Now, I think I'm not sure when exactly the timeline for this starts. I just know that it pretty much comes up to modern day, so I'm thinking like the 80s or the 90s is where we start in this book. And it is essentially like a collection of short stories of people and experiences that Shay has met, interacted with, etc. on the island of Madagascar. That format wasn't my favorite, but I think this book had a lot of worthwhile things to say. There is a lot of reflection on what it means to be Black and what it means to be Black in various cultures. There is discussion about hair and why blonde hair is so prized in places. There's discussion on colonization. It was a book that had a lot to offer, and for that reason I recommend it, but it is a slow read. It's not something you can really rush through. The next book I read was Punching the Air by Zoboi and Yusef Salaam. Yusef Salaam was they were the Central Park 5, but now they're going by something else. Basically, there were 5 Black boys, they were boys, who had been accused of a crime and arrested and sentenced to prison, but they didn't actually do it. So they ended up being exonerated years later. So he and Zoboi worked together, not to exactly tell his story, but kind of. So the character is fictional, the character we're following. His name is Amal, but his experience as a teenager in prison is a lot like what Yusef Salaam's experience was like as a teenager in prison. And this was heartbreaking. It is told in verse, and it is done extraordinarily well. And it is the type of book that will punch you right in the soul. And it was infuriating at times because of the way these boys, essentially they're boys, they're teenage boys, and the way they're treated is just abominable. Like, you see why our prison system fails to reform anybody, because that's not what it's about. They're not trying to help people. And it's just frustrating. It's frustrating to read, but it's important to know, I think. The next book I finished was Adulthood, Rites by Octavia Butler. This is a continuation from Dawn. It's the Xenogenesis trilogy. It's the Xenogenesis trilogy and or the Lilith's Brood trilogy. I think Xenogenesis is far better than Lilith's Brood, but honestly, if you Google either, you will get to where you're going. This book I liked just as much as Dawn. I didn't think I was going to like it initially, just from like the first chapter. The narrative voice, there's something about it. I wasn't sure I was gonna like it, but then by the time I got to like chapter 3, I was just as hooked as I had been while I was reading Dawn. While we're here, I'll just go ahead and talk. I finished out the trilogy. The final book was Imago, and I did not like this one as much. And I can't even tell you why I didn't like this one as much, because if I tell you what the situation is in book 3, that will completely ruin book 1. So suffice it to say, the characters I did not appreciate, and I didn't like the way certain things were presented and written. I felt like it was kind of backtracking to be like, oh, but actually this is what this is, so now this works for the plot, is how I don't know if that makes any sense. I hope it does. That one, not my favorite, but the first two are amazing. The last book I read in this Juneteenth category is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This kind of disappointed me. So Colson Whitehead is telling the true story of this reform school that was in Florida, and there was a graveyard, like the official graveyard, but then bodies were found in the backyard of the school, and nobody knows who they were or what was going on. Basically, through survivors who spent time at the school, it has come to light that there were horrible abuses taking place, both physically, mentally, sexually, the whole nine. The problem with this is that imagine living in that type of a situation. Wouldn't the atmosphere be tense, and wouldn't you be scared? Because I would be. The problem is the way this is written, I never felt that from any of the characters. It said it, but I never felt it in any way, shape, or form. I think this book could have been a little bit longer and really just taken more time with developing the characters and the atmosphere, because I felt like a lot was missing here. Now let's go into the random assortment of other fiction I read this month. The 4 books that made it into my mid-month wrap-up are Tsarina by Alpsten, Cleopatra, Daughter of the Nile by, I don't remember who the author is, it's one of the Royal Diaries books, so it's like a middle grade. Mirrorland by Carole Johnstone, and Salvaged by Madeline Rue, so if you want to hear about any of those, you can check it out in my mid-month. As for books I read after that mid-month wrap-up took place, I have The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley? I'm not sure. This was amazing. This is exactly what I've been looking for when I have been searching out Indigenous authors to tell Indigenous stories. Aside from the fact that I got a lot of cultural appreciation from this book, the story itself was phenomenal. There was a mystery involved. This was so good. We are following Donis. She is the daughter of an Indigenous man. I can't remember, are they Ojibwa? I can't remember the tribe at this point, and I don't have the book with me. It was a library book. And then her mother is of French descent, I think. Anyway, her mother's family, like, they almost like own the town. They're very wealthy, very high position, and so they were appalled when their 16-year-old daughter got knocked up by an indigenous man. So they sent her away to have the baby, and when she came back, Adonis's father was already married with a child by another woman. Then Adonis's father dies. She and her brother Levi, even though they have different mothers, they are very close. And the mystery aspect is that there is meth being dealt from the tribes, is what the FBI thinks. And so they're investigating that, and it gets very deep, but I thought it was beautifully done. Like I said, a lot of the cultural aspects were just, it was exactly what I was looking for. So thank you to Amy from the channel Potato Brarian for recommending this to me, because it was awesome. The next book to talk about, Pyramids by Terry Pratchett. This is my first Terry Pratchett book, and I don't know how I missed the memo that he is hilarious. And he'll just sneak like funny lines in where if you're not paying attention you won't get it, but if you are, you'll see it, and it's hilarious. He's also just irreverent and fabulous. Pyramids is kind of poking fun at religion, particularly like Egyptian religion with their pyramids and all that. Look. It's one of those things where I can't really describe it that well, but reading it is a great experience. Next book to talk about, The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This is a short story, and it was amazing. It follows an Iranian man. He is going in to take the British citizenship test, and it's like a 25-question test, and he's prepared. He really wants to become a citizen, and then things go badly wrong. This book was really great because it looks at topics like, what does a British citizen look like, and like cultural expectations, and I just thought it's applicable to a lot of countries, not just Britain. So I really enjoyed my time with that. I actually listened to it on audiobook and loved it so much that I went and bought the ebook, because I borrowed it from the library, but I had to have it and I had to read it again, so I actually went through this one twice this month. Next up, I have two books by Laura Purcell. One I adored and the other was not that good. The Silent Companions was phenomenal. If you like Gothic literature, definitely check this one out. We are following a woman. She's fairly young, but at this point in time, I think it's like the 1800s or something, she was kind of old to be getting married and having her first child. Anyway, she's pregnant with her first child. Her husband has just died, and she is traveling to the family home with her husband's cousin, and that's where she's supposed to have this baby. She hates the house because it's run down and it's creepy, and the townspeople want nothing to do with the house or anyone who lives in it. While she is exploring one day, she finds this wooden doll, and it looks astonishingly like her, and she is very uncomfortable with this. They find out that these wooden dolls are Dutch, and they're known as silent companions. So this book also has a diary from an earlier resident of the home. I think it's like roughly the 1600s. So the story is kind of interspersed with that. So you get like background of the home, the history, and you kind of start to see why the people in the town want nothing to do with this place. It was creepy, and it was, oh man, it set me on edge a little bit, but I really enjoyed it. As for The House of Whispers, which was the other Laura Purcell book I read, I didn't like this one nearly as much. Did it have atmosphere? Yes. Yes, it did. It is following this girl. Well, no, she's in her 30s. So she's definitely like a woman. She is a maid, usually like a lady's maid, and for whatever reason, her jobs just don't last very long. We know she's on the run from the beginning, but we don't really know quite why, although that is told to us later. And she has obtained work at this house in Cornwall. I think it's like in the middle of nowhere on this cliff, and there are these caves, and the inhabitants of the house are just strange. She's very uncomfortable with them. They are extremely superstitious. And she is supposed to be, the woman she's supposed to be taking care of has had like a stroke, and so she doesn't really speak. She's obsessed with sitting in this room with the china, but she won't like start a fire or anything. It's just all very bizarre. My problem is that a lot of the character motivations and a lot of their actions didn't seem to make much sense to me. Like, our main character is supposed to have an alcohol problem, which, okay, but the issue is that she develops it way too quickly. She's talking about when she left her last employment, where she's on the run, we know this, and she passed out somewhere and somebody gave her some gin to, like, bring her back to her senses. And, like, that was it. Then she was addicted, like, from that moment on. And I was like, no? Like, and not just she wanted it, to the point where if she didn't have it, her hands would be shaking and stuff like that. But the timeline of events, the way the author makes it seem, is that there's only a couple weeks between her leaving her last employment and coming to the new place. So that was just odd to me. And then I hated the ending, so that's that. Oh, next is another book I despised, The Maidens. Wait, I have that one here. By Alex Michaelides. Okay. So, just a little bit of background here. I loved Alex Michaelides' first book, The Silent Patient. I know a lot of people didn't, but I really enjoyed it, which is why I grabbed this book. This is supposed to be like a dark academia vibe. Our main character, Mariana, she is a group therapist. She gets a call from her niece who is at Cambridge, and she's freaking out because they found a dead body and her friend Tara is missing. So she goes to comfort her niece, and she finds out about this classics professor who focuses on, like, Greek tragedy. And he has this group of students that they are, like, obsessed with him. They go to all these extra tutoring sessions, but they're all beautiful, accomplished females, and they call themselves the Maidens. It's a very creepy dynamic. So I was expecting dark academia, maybe a little bit of a pretentious type atmosphere, not quite to, like, Donna Tartt level, but something, and I just didn't get it. And then on top of that, there are some men who just should never write female characters, and Alex Michaelides is one of them. He does not understand female motivations, he doesn't understand female empathy, he doesn't understand what it is to be a woman. Like, I stand by that. Because Mariana is just not a good character. There's too many things that conflict with each other too. Like, Zoe, initially, like, the way she's acting and the things she says makes you, like, suspect the classics professor. His name is Edward Fosca. And so her aunt does. She believes the things that Zoe said, and she really does think that this man had something to do with Tara's death. But then later on, Zoe's like, why are you so obsessed with it being him? The Maidens gave him an alibi. And it's like, well, dummy, I think it's him because you told me you thought it was him. And yeah, like, I'm gonna believe the alibi given by 6 girls who are obsessed with this man. Like, it was just stupid. And then I hated the ending. I hated the ending so much. If you want to know, just leave it in the comments and I'll let you know. Or I'm going to link to Natalie, her name is, her Goodreads review. It has spoilers in it, but it perfectly puts into words what I felt when I finished this book. The next thing I finished that I liked a lot more, A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. I don't really read plays, and I've never read anything by Tennessee Williams, but I got this from the library, and I really enjoyed it. This is just a book about people and messy relationships, And there's a lot of, like, I guess problematic elements with it. But A, that was just kind of how life was at that time and place. And B, for the characters, it made sense. It's one of those things that, like, left me not quite knowing how I felt about it, because I despised so much of what happened, but I thought the way it was done was good? I don't know. Early on, there's a lot of banter between Blanche Dubois and Stanley. Stanley is her brother-in-law. Blanche has just come from Mississippi to stay with her sister because they lost their plantation house, and she has nowhere else to go. And it's clear Stanley does not like Blanche, and Blanche does not like Stanley. But they also have, like, very negative opinions of each other. But once they start talking, like, Stanley knows immediately that Blanche has a drinking problem. She can't fool him. And Blanche immediately knows that Stanley's kind of a scary guy, and she's worried about her sister's safety. And it's just, I don't know, the way they spoke to each other, it was just so interesting. It was like banter, but not in a flirtatious manner. It was just really interesting. I think I would love to see this actually performed, and I think I would have a better understanding of what's going on, because sometimes things, I don't know, like, I felt like I missed things, and that there were things that I just didn't pick up on, and I think a lot of it was because this was written to be performed, not necessarily to be read. And the final book in the random assorted fiction was another Royal Diaries book, Elizabeth, the Princess Bride. This was really good. Well, alright, let me rephrase. The epilogue and the historical note were really good. Because this is a historical figure that I don't know that much about. The problem is the diary itself is almost as long as the epilogue and the historical note. So you get, like, nothing from that section. Like, hardly anything. I think it's less than 100 pages is the diary. So I didn't rate this. I think I've just decided I'm not rating any of these at all, because they're not written for me. I am not the target audience here. I'm just reading them because I enjoy reading them still. But yeah, this was a fun one, and it at least gave me an interest in picking up more on Elizabeth, so it did that for me. Okay, nonfiction, last section, heaven help us. In my mid-month wrap-up, I talked about Kings and Queens, A Chronicle of History's Most Interesting Monarchies by Brenda Ralph Lewis. I talked about Avidly Reads Guilty Pleasures by Ariel Zabrock. I also had a live stream with Amrita from Amrita by the Book and Rosie Cockshut. It was on Amrita's channel. I will link it in the description box if you want to go see all our thoughts on that. And then I also read Lab Girl by Hope Jaron, which I loved. So those will be in the mid-month wrap-up if you're interested in hearing more about any of those books. I only read 3 other books in the second half of the month. I read The Perfect Theory, A Century of Geniuses and the Battle Over General Relativity by Pedro G. Ferreira. This was fascinating. This had me researching so many things as I was reading through it, just because I wanted to know more. Yes, it is what the title says, but it's also like a who's who of 20th century physicists. And that was amazing. I had so much fun learning about all these people. A lot of them were names that I knew, like Einstein and Oppenheimer and Feynman, but like there were other ones that I hadn't heard that much about. So that was a really good experience. I also read, I actually have a physical copy of this, In the Garden of Beasts, Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin by Eric Larson. This was really good. This talks about Ambassador Tade. He and his family went to live in Berlin. He didn't really want to be the ambassador to Berlin, and he definitely wasn't Roosevelt's first choice. But nobody else wanted the gig. So in 1933, he heads over there with his family, and at this point, the world still has their head in the sand about who Hitler is and what he is doing. Even Ambassador Tade is trying to come from a point of it can't be that bad. Let's try and stay neutral. Let's not make anybody angry. But it doesn't take long before he is also throwing up red flags like, hey, this is not okay. We need to step in. We need to do something. This is going bad. But America is ignoring him. Partly because he doesn't fit in with the good old boys club. He is from a much more humble background. He is trying just to live on his salary alone because the country is currently in the Depression, and he doesn't think that with so many people suffering, he should be getting all this extra money to throw these fancy parties and things. The problem is that kind of alienates him in Berlin because that is what is expected of a man in his position. So he's not well liked, and people don't take him seriously. The other thing that's interesting here is you find out just how little the American government cared about what was happening in Nazi Germany. What they wanted was they wanted Ambassador Tade to push the German government to repay loans that creditors from America had given to them at I think right after World War I. So that was a lot of interesting information in here. A lot of just interesting people, and interesting to see like the cognitive dissonance on display. And the final book. The Nocturnal Brain, Nightmares, Neuroscience, and the Secret World of Sleep by Guy Leschner. This was interesting. So I have a very weird relationship with sleep. I sleep poorly, which leads to me loving to take naps. Like, I don't sleep very well at night usually, but during the day I do okay. So I thought I would give this a shot and see if there's any useful information in it. A lot of this is just anecdotes about various patients that Dr. Leschner has seen in his sleep clinic, and that was interesting but also horrifying at times, because some people experience some like traumatic things when it comes to sleep. So I enjoyed it because of the anecdotes, and he did give some decent information, but there was nothing that ever really pulled me to keep coming back to this book. But if you're interested in weird sleep conditions, this is a book you should check out. And that is it. My throat is sore. I am so glad we are done. Let me know all your thoughts about any of the books I've read in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.